Welcome to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas. Open Minds Radio is your UFO news authority, presenting evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
Hello and welcome to Open Minds Radio. This is your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we have another spectacular show today. That was cool. I came up with spectacular. It's not even on my list of like astonishing, magnificent. I need to put that down here. Another word I can use. Spectacular. Because that's what today is. I am very excited. I'm always excited. I always say that. Maybe I have to come up with more words than just excited about today, because we have another rare interview, and that is with Colonel Charles Halt. You've probably heard him on Coast to Coast, or you've seen him on television. But really, he doesn't do that many interviews. So we're very lucky to have him. He is a colonel, retired colonel from the Air Force, and you may have heard of the Rendlesham Forest incident. And that's pretty much, arguably, maybe the best UFO case ever. I know when we had Nick Pope on, he feels that way. The reason being is because we do have a lot of officers, or at least a few officers, military people who are now retired, who are out talking about this incident. And we have a record on file about this whole thing. So, Charles Halt, essentially how this started, he wrote a memo to talk about this event. This memo came out. The British released it because it was actually a British base being leased by the U.S. Air Force that this happened on, Bentwaters Royal Air Force Base. And it was about this whole incident that we'll be talking about today. We have had James Peniston on before. He was another witness. He was actually the witness to the first night where they went out and investigated this whole thing. And he had gone and actually touched the craft. He was a sergeant who was taking notes and checking the thing out and walking around this triangular craft on the ground, touched it. You have to listen to our Peniston show to hear the details on that. But we will ask Halt about that incident. In fact, he was skeptical. He thought, those guys were full of it, or they had mistaken what they seen. There's no way they saw a UFO out there. He was a deputy base commander. And so the next night when people saw lights, he said, hey, I'm going to go out and look at this thing for myself. And lo and behold, he now understands that this was something extraordinary. And it's going to be an extraordinary interview, so stay tuned for that one. It's going to be a lot of fun talking to Halt. He's actually now the highest ranking retired military officer to be speaking about a UFO incident that he had during his tenure. So that's very exciting, I think. That's cool stuff. So we'll be talking to him in a minute. A couple of things I want to let you in on. Film Festival. The UFO Congress, the International UFO Congress that's coming up, the largest UFO gathering in the country, possibly the world, at least on a regular basis, is coming up February 23rd to the 27th. So I've talked to you about that before. Colonel Halt will be there. Many others will be there. And it also has a film festival associated with it. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of your favorite paranormal videos, such as Touched, I know is a big one. That was a John Mack documentary. Some of the crop circle ones that have come out lately. Patty Greer had one. There's some others I can't think of, but a lot of other movies out there. Well, you'll see it on the cover. It says it won an EBE award. Well, the EBE awards are awarded at the UFO Congress. And so it is a film festival as well. And you'll be able to watch some of the movies that are nominees and the winners at the Congress when you come. And if you yourself are a filmmaker, perhaps you're an aspiring filmmaker, you can submit your own movie to the festival. And of course, mostly we want documentaries, but you can also do them short. I mean, you've got time to go out in the next few weeks and shoot some stuff and put it together and send it to us. And I'm not going to name any of the films just so nobody gets any hurt feelings, but the production values on these movies range from very high, what you'd see on TV, just excellent, wonderful stuff. But they also go down to the very novice amateur filmmaker who, quite frankly, sometimes needs a lot more experience shooting some stuff. So really, no matter what level you're at, feel free to submit whatever you've done to us, and we'll take a look. And we're going to have a panel of impartial judges who are going to look, and then we're going to take a tally amongst them. And all of the votes are anonymous, so we'll be able to figure out what people like the most. So really, I encourage you, I implore you, any of you out there that want to shoot or become a filmmaker, or you feel you are a filmmaker, go ahead and submit. Nothing is too amateur for this contest, because who knows? You may have a genius there that you're not even aware of. We may look at this thing, and even though you're kind of embarrassed and you think, man, I could have done a better job, the people who watch it may think, whoa, this guy is the next Spielberg. You win an award, you're up at our banquet, free dinner at our banquet, and if you win, well, I don't know if that's the case, so we can't. I'll pay for their dinner if they win. If you win, and you'll get to be in front of all of your colleagues and some of your favorite UFO researchers, and they'll be clapping as you tearfully accept your reward, and it'll be just a moment to remember for the rest of your life. So please submit to our film festival, or if you like, come and see the film festival. It's another reason to come to the Congress, because every night we'll be showing the nominees up until Saturday night when we have the banquet and we award the winners. And it is, just like the Grammys or something. It's just incredible, except instead of, Tom Cruise out in the crowd, you have Jim Mars, Colonel Halt, Bob Dean out there. He's kind of looks like a movie star in a bit, and he talks like maybe a kind of a Sean Connery type character. So it's a lot of fun. Another reason to come to the Congress, and that's at the that's at just ufocongress.com. Of course, you can go to openminds.tv and find out more about that. And if you're wondering, if you're one of those people who every year gets in the mail the schedule of events, and you like to register once you've got that document, we've got those going out. So those will be out to everybody very soon with a registration form on there, so you can fill that out, write out your check, send it in. You can even go online and register. However you like to do it. You can even give us a call, though we prefer online. Our person who takes those calls is very busy. Please use the internet. And hey, you know how it is when you call in. You're always risking the chance of the person you're calling being grouchy, and who wants to talk with a grouchy person, Not to say that, person taking the calls is always grouchy, but you never know. So really cool stuff. I'm excited about our magazine. Right now we're working on our Crop Circle magazine, which is going to be coming out in February, which is kind of weird because we just have our latest issue coming out on UFO landings, or on various different topics like different types of aliens and stuff like that. But our Crop Circle one is also shaping up to be really good. If you haven't subscribed, or if you haven't renewed your subscription, you need to do that, because you're going to want this Crop Circle magazine. It's got all the ins and outs of crop circles. I mean, it's got all of the different theories, I think some history that a lot of people don't know about. It's got the idea, we had Jacques Vallée on the other day, and he was talking about the possibility of man-made crop circles. So we've got, that theory kind of fleshed out on here. So we cover everything regarding crop circles, let alone a ton of beautiful crop circles pictures. So this is going to be a great magazine. So you need to renew your subscription if you get your magazine, which you should be getting any moment now if you haven't already gotten it. I think most people already got the latest. And fill out that renewal. So that was a really fun one. Of course, we've still got on our YouTube, as I've talked about the last couple of weeks, a lot of cool videos going up. In fact, I'm excited about this video we're going to have coming up in the next day or two. And that's a UFO type thingy I call it a UFO because it's unidentified, but it's almost ghostly or I don't know what the heck this thing is. But a few years back when I did a talk at MUFON in Greeley, Colorado, some of the people who were there gave me this video to look at, and they had just gotten back from a trip in Las Vegas, and you see this weird thing in the sky. They're by New York, and this thing's flying around. It kind of does this swoop down to the New York roller coaster, which you're standing by, and kind of flies around it and flies around the roller coaster a bit before going back into the air as it just kind of goes back and forth over the strip in Las Vegas. Very strange video. I sent that to George Knapp in Las Vegas, see if he could figure it out, and he was perplexed as well. So it's a neat video, and I'm excited to finally be sharing that. So we're going to have that up on our YouTube very soon. You can subscribe to our YouTube, and that way you'll be sure to get all of the videos that we have coming up. So we've got a lot of cool stuff, and some of the cool stuff, of course, we have every day at our website are some of the headlines from conventional news, because UFOs are in the news all the time. And speaking of one of the cool assets that we have here at Open Minds, that would be Jason McClellan, our news correspondent. Also, he writes for the magazine. He produces a radio. He does all kinds of stuff. And I'm very happy to have Jason here to tell us about UFOs in the news. Hello, Jason.
Greetings, Alejandro.
Greetings.
Hello, world. This is your Open Minds News Brief for Monday, November 29th, 2010. Space Exploration Technologies, also known as SpaceX, has been granted a re-entry license by the Federal Aviation Administration for their SpaceX Dragon space capsule. This is significant for two reasons. One, this is the first re-entry license ever issued for a privately developed spacecraft. And two, the unmanned re-entry test of the SpaceX Dragon will bring the company closer to its goal of teaming with NASA to provide commercial trips to the International Space Station.
That is the beginning of, and we posted another story and lots of news starting to come out finally about this whole idea of Obama giving money to private sector to start doing some trips to taking over a lot of these NASA tasks.
And there are so many companies getting involved in this, and we've talked about it many times before. It's a space race all over again with these private companies. And many people were worried when they heard about the shift in funding and what might become of NASA. But it's really cool with things like this, with companies SpaceX and other companies teaming with NASA to work together on these missions and further space exploration.
Yeah, some people are worried about safety concerns, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because I guess we'll just have to see. Time will tell, because these companies aren't going to want to lose their contracts. So they're going to be very conscientious around the safety, because, of course, the first private company to have a disaster, that's not a person you want to be. That's going to be bad news.
Well, and the licensing involved with all of this and the scrutiny these companies are under, safety, I'm sure, is going to be one of the top things that's looked at before they're given permission to do anything, really.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is going to be very interesting. I think what's interesting about this, too, is that it gives enough of a boost to the private space industry that we can actually see it launch. I mean, we're going to be seeing the new spaceport, which is partially federally funded, opening in New Mexico, where these guys are going to be launching out of. So no matter what happens in the future regarding federal funding or not, I think that this is going to be just a burgeoning industry regardless, and this kind of gives it a shove forward.
This year alone, we've seen this industry explode. Just the developments that have been made in the past months with companies like Virgin Galactic. It's incredible how fast it's moving now.
Yep. So. Exciting.
Speaking of exciting, there was another UFO sighting in Tucson, Arizona last week. A lot of UFO activity in Tucson. Several suspicious lights were in the sky last Saturday night, and witnesses reported the lights to Tucson's ABC affiliate KGUN 9. As they have done several times in the past, KGUN investigated the lights, which were similar in appearance to the Phoenix lights of 1997. Air Force flares were offered up as a possible explanation for the Phoenix lights back in '97, so KGUN checked with Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, But a representative there said they did not launch any flares during that time, and further, the Air Force Base had no idea what the lights were. A Tucson UFO hunter caught the strange lights on camera, and you can watch the video on YouTube or on our website to see the lights for yourself. It's a fascinating video, but even the person who recorded the video suggests right away, are those Chinese lanterns?
Oh, yeah. You know, I'd have to, because that's the one where I think it is the Chinese lanterns.
When the camera zoomed in, as you noted, you can see the individual lights sort of in a spinning motion.
Yeah, as if the lamp is spinning, and then it looks like if it's not a Chinese lantern, I mean, it's shaped the same because it's a tube type object with a light in the middle at the end. And you can tell this because when it spun and you could see through the material to the light, or you could see the light directly when the light was closest to you as it turned. So you can see the cycle as it turned, and when she zoomed in, you could really see that. So, I mean, do they sell these everywhere? That's what I would want to look into. People save them from July 4th, or maybe is there a place out there in Tucson where they're selling them all year long?
It'd be an interesting thing to look into, where these things are distributed to, but again, as we've mentioned, they're easily purchased on the internet.
Right.
So.
Yep.
But you know, K-Gun has the channel down there in Tucson reports UFO sightings almost it seems like every week or every other week.
Yeah.
They're really hip with the UFO stories, but it seems like anyone that involves just lights in the night sky, they always go to their go-to guy down there, an astronomer named James Magaha. And you can almost put money on it. Anytime they bring a video to him, right away he's going to say, oh, it's flares.
Yeah.
He doesn't even examine the video, he says it's flares.
Yeah. And one thing these were flares.
No, they were not flares. And you can tell that by looking at the video, first of all. But second, the reasoning he offers up is just spilling over with skepticism. You can tell that he just doesn't want to believe anything except flares. And one of his quotes, which just caught me off guard, was, it's obviously not a UFO. Absolutely not. Because why would UFOs travel thousands of light years to come here and then turn their lights on?
Right.
How does he know they don't always have lights on?
Or what sort of energy is emitted that, to our eyes, looks like a light?
Right.
It could be for any various other purposes. It could be the propulsion or an effect from the propulsion or something. Who knows? But this guy, I mean, he's the guy that was on Larry King that first said the Phoenix lights were A-10s, when those people said when they went over their heads there was no sound. And if anybody has been anywhere near an A-10 while it flies, those things are they're extremely loud. Those things are really loud. And then also, he's the one who got in kind of an argument where Larry King even thought, what are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. With James Peniston, who I was talking about earlier, when James Peniston said he touched the object. And Larry King says, well, how can you explain that? How can you say it was a lighthouse light far away or something if he went up and touched the thing? And James McGaha's like, nope, he misinterpreted what he saw. And even Larry King's like, come on, how can you say that?
Yeah, his reasonings are frustrating, but you know, he's set in his point of view, it seems. And there are just people like that. It's frustrating, but move on. You can't get too angry. We continue in our investigation and keep an open mind. I thought this was kind of fitting. On Thursday was Thanksgiving here in the United States, and there was an interesting UFO from Turkey posted on YouTube last week. Did you like that, Alejandro? Turkey and Thanksgiving? Even though I don't eat turkey, I'm a vegetarian. But what appeared to be a winged sphere is seen hovering above a Turkish town in this video. Now, this is an interesting video because you've got what seems like a very illuminated object in the sky. And you see sort of a spherical shape in the middle, but then it jets out to the sides in what they're calling wings in this video, a winged sphere. And my initial reaction to the video was that it was an airplane, because it looks like those wings could be an airplane coming towards the camera. But it's really difficult to make out because the camera, like a lot of UFO videos, is zoomed in almost all the time in the video. It's full digital zoom, so it's very pixelated and trying to fixate on the luminosity of the object. So it's difficult to make out. But what do you think of the video?
I agree with you. At first, I thought it was a plane flying towards the person, but then he zooms out, so you're able to see the object is high in the air, far away, and it still keeps that shape of the wings with the bulbous area in the middle, which doesn't make sense because, of course, a plane would be at an angle unless it was heading straight for him. It's going to kamikaze him or something. And even if it did look like that for a moment, it wouldn't stay, I think, looking like that as planes move around. And, if you watch a plane as it flies by, I mean, because the angle's changing, the shape kind of changes as you see more wing or less, or more of the fuselage or less. And it didn't do that. It was the same throughout the video. It was the same looking shape and size. So, like you, at first it was like, oh, that's a plane. But then over time, it gets strange. And what's strange is it seems to have some sort of halo effect. Or
the luminosity of the object seems to behave differently from most videos that I've seen.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah. It was definitely a strange video.
Check it out. Pretty cool to see. We have the link on our website.
In our next magazine, we have a very famous Turkey.
That's right.
UFO story that we wrote something up on where we did some more research. And that seems to be a real UFO also.
That is one of the most fascinating videos to watch, or a group of videos, the Turkey videos.
I really tried to tackle this and to figure out what it was. I looked at what the skeptics had to say and the debunkers, and I thought, maybe they have something here, but every theory they had just didn't seem to stick or to hold. So very mysterious.
But that's a great article, and that'll be in our February, March issue, right?
March, yep.
So you're teasing people. They're going to have to wait quite a while.
It'll be here before you know it. It's almost December already.
That's right. A mysterious object was reported in the sky above Polk County, Florida last week. Several witnesses reported the UFO to local Fox affiliate Fox 13. The bright object was followed by a smoke or vapor trail. Witnesses were unable to determine if the object was burning up or if it simply had an illuminated vapor trail because of the setting sun. We know that all too well from the recent LA missile sighting. The UFO could have been a meteor or space junk entering Earth's atmosphere, but witnesses were not able to determine the object's identity, and Fox 13 has been unable to reach experts who might be able to identify the strange object. That was another cool picture. I don't think there was any video associated with that story, but there was a picture of some object. It appeared to be burning up.
Yeah, it was either what they said, the thing was reflecting the sun, so it looked really yellow. I mean, it was a very strong reflection, or like you said, it was something burning up. Either way, it did seem to be something prosaic, something known.
Right. A documentary called My Mom Talks to Aliens will air tomorrow on the SBS network in Australia. The documentary focuses on the life and research of Mary Rodwell, who is affectionately referred to in Australia as the Alien Lady. Rodwell founded the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network in 1997, which helps alien abduction victims deal with their experiences. In the documentary, Mary introduces her skeptic son to clients and tries to educate him about the world of aliens. Sounds like an interesting show, but I don't think we'll be able to see it here.
Unfortunately. Mary Rodwell was at the UFO Congress last year, so maybe we'll be able to keep in contact, and maybe we'll ask her she can write something for us about it, or maybe give us some clips of the video. That would be pretty cool.
It sounds like a cool show, and they're going to have these alien abduction victims on the show.
Yep. Well, but I know we do have some Australian listeners, so now they have a heads up to check out the show and write us and let us know what you think.
There's a lot going on in the world of UFOs in Australia. The UFO Watchtower in Colorado's San Luis Valley was mentioned in the New York Times website last week. This tourist attraction was built a decade ago, and an estimated 59 UFO sightings have taken place there since the year 2000. According to the owner, the world needs a place where people can go to talk about their experiences and not be laughed at, which is the key reason why she opened the UFO Watchtower. Have you ever been there?
Yeah, I have. Of course, many times, and I've talked about this experience. I don't think we have time today, but that's where I had my first UFO sighting. And it was kind of neat because Westward, which is a local paper that often makes fun of people, wrote about the New York Times writing about this because they've written about it before, and they found it curious that of all newspapers, this would be the one to pick it up. And but they had to admit it's hard to make fun of the place because the lady, Judy Messeline, who runs it, is just the nicest, most gracious person. And it does, even if you're a skeptic and you go there, she's just so fun and so nice that she's willing to accept what you have to say and talk to you and talk about it.
That's cool. I figured you'd been there, being Colorado and all. But.
Yeah, in fact, I used to host a yearly gathering that IMC that we used to have out there.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun every summer.
Looking at the pictures, it looks like a really cool place.
Yeah. The San Luis Valley, of course, is very mysterious. Again, we have a story on the San Luis Valley, actually, in our upcoming issue with the crop circles. But, yeah, very mysterious place, really cool place.
Many more news stories to go, but I am out of time, Alejandro.
You got time for one more.
One more?
Just
All
one
right,
more.
we'll do one more. The Cassini mission, jointly run by NASA and the European Space Agency, made an exciting discovery last week. One of Saturn's moons has oxygen. Rhea, Saturn's second largest moon, has an atmosphere that is 70% oxygen and 30% carbon dioxide. According to a spokesperson from the Mullard Space Science Laboratory at University College London, this is the first time that we've seen oxygen directly in the atmosphere of another world. The new findings suggest that oxygen may actually be common in our solar system, but data also suggests that Rhea lacks water and is too cold to support life as we know it.
Wow, I hadn't read that story, but if there's oxygen so close, it means that many other planets may have oxygen, planets that do have water.
That's what they're saying. So it's exciting news, and as we point out, all of these different missions that are ongoing, they keep finding new things. Water here, oxygen there.
Well, the planet we know best happens to have water and oxygen and an abundance of life.
And in some places, I think it's too cold to support life, but fortunately, we live in Arizona.
Yeah.
That is it for the news. Remember to check out these stories and more at openminds.tv, your source for UFO-related news. I'm Jason McClellan, your Open Minds news correspondent, and you've been briefed. Back to you, Alejandro.
All right. Thank you, Jason. A lot of interesting news out there all of the time, so that's really exciting. And we have a lot of interesting news on our website all the time, which is also very exciting. Some of the stuff that's on there we just talked about, but a couple of stories that we have out there that you might not know about. This is one I might have talked about this last week, but we have a Native American gentleman named Rainbow Eagle, who's a Choctaw Indian who has learned a lot of stuff from elders, and it's kind of been his task to go and share Native American wisdom from the old days with the Western culture. So I did an interview with him actually at the UFO Watchtower, funny enough, and I took this interview and transcribed it and put it on the website, and it was really Native American philosophy about alien abduction. So he's someone who has studied UFOs, talks about the Star Brothers and the Star Peoples and, you know, Native American legend of talking with extraterrestrials. And so he shared some of that to me, and this whole thing about abduction, I asked him, you know, is this a Native American experience as well? And he then began to talk to me about it and their different thoughts. And so it's very interesting, different thoughts about personal space, how we observe each other and how you observe life and nature. So it's a really, I think it's a fun story, and it's interesting insight into some what I think of as, you know, incredible philosophy. I really love the Native American philosophy. I've been into all kinds of different philosophies, including, you know, different Asian philosophies. And what I found interesting when I've had conversations with Rainbow Eagle are some of these common themes between Asian philosophies and Native philosophies, maybe just ancient philosophies or more similar. And it's been a lot of fun because there is a lot of wisdom there. And he'll be at the UFO Congress sharing some of that wisdom as well. And he'll have a table there all week. So if you can't make it to the beginning, you know, you'll be able to meet and talk with him. And I recommend you do, because he's a very wise and fun person. And he approaches all of this in a non-victimization, non-fear type of aspect. And it makes you feel really good and positive talking to him. Another story that we put up was one from 1967. Here again, we went into the Wendell Stevens archives and found a report from some hikers near Calgary who had a UFO sighting. So we wrote up that account And then we put those pictures up as well, and the pictures are very interesting. You can zoom in, and you really see this kind of elliptical shaped object, and it's a pretty good picture. I mean, these are photographs, negatives, which he had the original photographs and then took the negatives and developed them in black and white too. So actually the black and white they did was a higher resolution, so you can see the objects or the object even better. So it's a very interesting picture. I think another strong argument for the reality of this whole phenomenon. Another, one of the strongest arguments towards the reality of this whole phenomenon is the Rendlesham Forest case. And we have one of the most important witnesses, the highest ranking witness to that event with us today. I'm so excited about it. Mr. Charles Halt, are you on the phone?
Well, I am. It's good to hear you again.
Yes, great to talk with you. I'm so excited to talk about all of this because I do have a lot of questions around all of this. But I guess what my first question would be, how has it been for you to be outspoken to, since you've kind of tackled it even more lately, I think probably due to Leslie Kean's book, where you've been out and about talking about this subject?
You know, the most interesting thing is, I'd say about 95% of the people that that are familiar with what happened or have read Leslie's book or heard about the book or in some way or shape or another have found out about the incident have been somewhat supportive and very, very curious and interested in hearing exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a terribly interesting event, and probably one of the best on record, mostly due to the memo you had written to the British, right, about what had happened, essentially the first couple of evenings of the sightings.
Well, you know what's interesting is that I only took the tape recorder along because I routinely carried the tape recorder. It was part of the system we used in the office. We had a linear dictaphone system. This is back when word processors were just starting to hit the public. And we had a memory typewriter with a linear system tied into it. So it was very common for my boss and I. We had the little linear recorders. By the way, I still have it because it's non-functional. But anyhow, to carry it around the base or wherever we were going and to make notes into it rather than carrying a pencil and paper or a notebook. And we'd come back and give the recorder to the secretary, and she'd plug it in and type up the notes, and we'd pass them out at the staff meeting or whatever was appropriate. So, you know, that's the only reason I really had the tape recorder with me. As far as the memo, I almost wrote the memo under duress. I didn't really want to, you know, hey, how did I get into this? I don't want to be involved. This is, you know, too troublesome, career-threatening, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody will believe this. And those above me, you know, were all hands off, stand back. Hey, it's your problem now. Write a memo, do something. Get with the ministry folks here, the local RAF liaison officer, as we call him, the British base commander. And I went to him. He was gone for 2 weeks on holiday in Wales, and I had to wait. So he came back, and I said, what do we do, Don? His name was Don Moreland. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, let me make some phone calls. So he made some phone calls and come back and said, well, write me a memo or something. So I kind of abbreviated, if you know what I mean, and made it something nondescript, I guess, in a lot of ways, because I didn't want to say we saw a UFO or we saw this or that. I called it unexplained lights. It was typed in the office. My boss saw it. I knew everybody above me was aware of it, but they all, again, stayed at arm's length. I gave it to Don Moreland. He sent it to the Ministry of Defense. And I thought that was the end of it. I expected somebody really to come from the MOD, Ministry of Defense, and investigate, or a team or whatever. Nothing happened. Unbeknownst to me, he had sent a copy to his superior, 3rd Air Force. Somehow copies were made there and floated around and became common knowledge, unbeknownst to me again. And that's how the memo got out, from there, not from me. There was no official copy at Bentwaters. The only copy I had was on what we called onion skins. They're a carbon manifold, you know, the typing paper behind a sheet of carbon paper. I didn't even have a copy with letterhead on it.
So I guess just to start off, I mean, there were some events on. Now I think I know the dates were a little bit off from or in dispute from your memo to the eyewitnesses. But I think it was then the morning of the 26th of December, 1980.
The original event occurred on Christmas night, the 25th, into the morning of the 26th.
Right.
The night I went out was the night of the 27th, the morning of the 28th. That's where the confusion comes in.
Gotcha. So the
actual event occurred on the 28th, but it started on the 27th when I was summoned to go.
Gotcha. So what had you heard about the first night of events, which John Burroughs, I guess it was John Pennison or James Pennison and
Ed
Cabanasac had experienced? What did you hear about that, and what did you think of it?
Well, typically I spent a lot of time with the police, the fire department, and I was the eyes and ears for the base commander. That was my job.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one, he shook hands, cut ribbons, kissed babies, gave speeches. I stayed in the background. It was my job to see that he was fed all the necessary information, that everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. So it was very common for me to, on the way to work in the morning, to go by the law enforcement desk and talk to the desk sergeant and pick up the police blotters. The police blotters being the activity for the previous 24 hours. And take them up to the office, and we would scan them to see if anything happened that we needed to know about or hadn't been informed during the night.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walked into the police station that morning, the on-duty staff sergeant, Crash McCabe, that was his nickname, started laughing when I walked in. And he had a good sense of humor. And I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "Well, Burroughs and Pennison and Cabanasac were out in the woods chasing UFOs all night," and he laughed. Well, I kind of laughed, too. I said, "Well, tell me more about this." I never really paid much attention to UFOs or was a follower or anything else. And I said, "Specifically, what happened?" He said, "I really don't know. All I know is that they saw some lights. They went into the forest. They were gone a long time. We lost contact with them for a while. And the lieutenant said, 'Don't put anything in the blotter.'" I said, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. Put something. You got to put something in there. You can put in there unexplained lights or something of that nature." So he added something to the blotter of that nature, and I don't remember the exact wording. Those blotters, by the way, disappeared a little later.
Wow.
And I collected the blotters and took them up to the office. We all kind of had a chuckle and thought, well, there's an explanation for this. Headlights from a car in the forest, who knows what, or some kids out there parking at night, or somebody drinking in the forest, or whatever. And I didn't think a whole lot about it. And unbeknownst to me, the police were in a frenzy almost, because the word got out that Pennison and Burroughs touched some object or saw an object in the following, and rumors went flying around. And I heard some of them, but really didn't put a whole lot of, I wasn't really confident that something that couldn't be explained happened.
Right.
2 nights later, we had the end of the year party. We called it a family gathering, a Christmas party to recognize those that had done significant things during the year and to congratulate those that had done well, etc. I had finished the main course, and we're getting ready for dessert when Bruce England came in. He was the on-duty flight commander for the Security Police Squadron, and he was white as a sheet. And Bruce England wasn't the kind of a guy to get excited. He had been, I think he spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. He was very mature, very down-to-earth guy, very businesslike. And to see him excited kind of bothered me a bit, because I had never seen him like that. And he cornered me and said, "It's back." I said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO." I said, "Oh, come on." So he and I and the base commander went into the cloakroom. It was the only private place in that little building where we were having the party. And I said, "Specifically, what happened?" He said, "We were out in the forest. We saw something. We saw some lights. We couldn't explain it. We took some light alls out." I said, "You took what out into the forest?" I mean, this is going off base in a foreign country. He said, "Well, something's going on out there." So myself, I was a bit concerned then, more concerned about the public relations with what the fallout of this all could have been.
Mm-hmm.
And the base commander said, "Well, I've got to give a few speeches and present some awards. Why don't you go out and investigate this, and we'll sort this thing all out." So I said to him, "Okay." And I was wearing a suit, so I had to go home and change clothes. And I talked to the police commander, Mel Zickler, and I said, "Who do you have available?" And he said, "Well, Master Sergeant Bobby Ball is available. He's on duty tonight." I knew Master Sergeant Ball, very responsible person. I said, "Can you have him collect me at the house in about 30 minutes?" And I went to the disaster preparedness officer, and I said, "Who's your standby person?" And she said, "Monroe Nevels." And I knew Nevels because Nevels had been involved in a lot of exercises we had, and I knew he was a very good amateur photographer. In fact, he had a degree in photography and had worked part-time for the base newspaper. So I said, well, call him, have him meet me at the disaster preparedness office with his camera, and be prepared to go into the woods. I went home and changed clothes. The police picked me up. Bobby Ball picked me up in a Jeep. We went down to the disaster preparedness office, and Sergeant Nevels was already there with his camera. And I said, take one of your Geiger counters, an APN 27, just in case, so we can show that there was no radiation out there. So he picked up a couple and said, well, which one do I take? I said, well, calibrate both and see which one's the best. He said, well, they're both the same. I said, well, pick one. So he did. And off we went. We went down to the motor pool to get fuel because the Jeep needed some gas. And several light-alls were down there getting refueled because somebody out in the forest had sent them back saying they wouldn't work because they were out of gas. Well, when we got there, they weren't out of gas, but they were trying to put more gas in. So we fueled and went across the base out the back gate, or the east gate, as it's now known, infamously, I guess.
Right.
And down into the forest. And lo and behold, there's, I'm guessing, 25, maybe 30 cops out there. And, half a dozen or more vehicles,
Wow.
3 or 4 light-alls. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, this is a public relations disaster. I mean, somebody calls in and calls the local PCs, and the press comes out here and says, here's all these crazy Americans running around the woods in the middle of the night investigating UFOs. I'm thinking, boy, this is beyond control already. So Bruce England at that time says, the landing site, they were talking about this landing site from the previous night and a half or 2 nights before, is right out there. So we look out there through the starlight scope, and I see a dull glow, sort of, and I'm not really sure. But anyhow, he takes me out into the forest, and I tell everybody else, stay here and be quiet. We go out, and they take me to this supposed site, and there's 3 indentations. We measure them. They're equidistant apart, about a foot in diameter, 3 to 4 inches deep. And we're milling around there, measuring, taking radiation readings, which turned out to be about 8 to 9, 10 times higher than normal background radiation.
Wow.
The area in the center of the triangle formed by the 3 indentations has a much higher reading than in the indentations themselves. There was a very heavily mature pine forest we were in. Looking overhead, we can see that while the branches were broken, and directly over that site where the 3 indentations were, you could see the sky, and that was the only place in that area you could see through the pine canopy. Radiation readings were taken on the pine trees, which turned out to be much higher on the side toward the supposed landing site than the other side of the tree. And we're talking about things and milling around a bit, and suddenly, I think it was Bruce England said, what's that we see over there?
Mm-hmm. Now, at this point, I know you had come out into the forest expecting to find a prosaic answer, but now that you started getting these strange readings, how were you feeling then? Were you thinking maybe there is something more to this situation?
What I was really feeling is, how did I ever get into this, and how am I going to get out of this?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Why
didn't I stay back there and send somebody else? So,
and then at this point, somebody sees something else.
I believe it was Bruce England, as I remember. See something. A red glowing object with a black center.
And was it on the ground?
No, it was above the ground. And my guess is it was maybe 10, 15 feet above the ground.
Okay.
At that point, it appeared stationary for a moment or two. We watched it, and then it started to move. It moved horizontally, but not in a smooth pattern. It actually bobbed up and down and came into the forest and moved through the trees. So,
Wow.
in other words, it went basically horizontally, but it occasionally went vertically, going around things, and it was obviously under some type of control. We watched it probably, I don't know, minute, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. At one point, it came toward us, and then it receded away from us and went out into the farmer's field. We watched it there for a little bit, and I said, let's try and approach and get closer. The whole time, the black center appeared sort of like an eye, like it was winking.
Wow.
And it appeared to be dripping, the equivalent I would relate it to molten metal. It was shedding something.
And people were pretty excited at this point. I mean, you can tell in the audio, which probably picks up around here, that we can hear. People sound pretty excited.
Well, a well-known reporter by the name of Chuck DeCaro took the copy of the tape on, well, it's been 10 or 15 years ago, and had an analysis done, a voice stress analysis done by the people who did the Watergate tapes, by the way. And he came back and said, gee, you guys are really excited, weren't you? I said, we sure were.
Yeah. So then go ahead.
Stayed there. We watched the object, and then the object was reflecting. Now, the farmer's house was directly across the field from us.
Mm-hmm.
And we could see the object reflecting in the windows, and it was just flickering like the building was on fire.
Wow.
We watched, and I was very concerned for whoever was in the building because it wasn't that far from the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, wow, I'm glad I'm not in that house. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the object just silently exploded into 5 white objects, much smaller, and they all just disappeared.
Wow. So they didn't head up.
No, they exploded out like a starburst, sort of like a fireworks.
Oh, I see. And disappeared. Wow. So now what are you thinking?
Well, I really didn't know what to think then. I'm still thinking there's a logical explanation. It's ball lightning, who knows what, reflection off something. So I said, let's take the flashlights and go out in the field and look and see if we can find any evidence, because there was obviously something coming off that object. So we went out into the field and searched around. The only thing we found is evidence that the cattle had been there. So we decided to move a little further across toward the farmer's house just to get down and look down that way to see if we could see anything. And we saw something in the sky. Looking to the north, 30, 40 degrees off the horizon, were elliptical objects, 3 or 4 of them, moving at real high speed and with sharp angular movements. I mean, very high speed.
Mm-hmm.
And they suddenly, with multiple colored lights on them, and they suddenly turned into full round objects as though there'd been like an eclipse. That's the only way I can describe it. But now we're talking not one object, but many objects.
Mm-hmm.
And we watched them for probably, 5 or 10 minutes or so. And we decided to move on out into the open field across from the farmer's house to get a better view. And we went out there in the field, and we're watching. We suddenly saw 2 objects to the south. And these were just bright, bright, bright white lights. I guess it's 3,000-4,000 feet.
Were they any shape to these?
They were stationary.
Okay.
At that time. Then one of them suddenly approached at very high speed, came almost directly overhead,
wow,
just slightly in front of us, and sent down what I would now call the equivalent of a laser beam. In other words, a steady white beam that was uniform in diameter, did not radiate out.
And about, what was that diameter?
10 or 12 inches.
Okay, wow.
So we stood there really in awe, like, is this a warning? Is this a message? Is this to communicate? What is this? And just as suddenly as it appeared, click. It didn't make a noise, but it went off just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the object receded back toward the south. In the meantime, the other object came over what I think appeared to be Woodbridge Base and was sending down similar beams. And we could hear chatter. Now, keep in mind, we had 3 different radio frequencies. I was carrying a radio on the command net. Bobby Ball, I think, was on law enforcement, and Bruce England was on security net, so 3 different radio nets. And we could hear the chatter from the police on the security net that these beams were falling down into or near the WSA, weapons storage area. Well, I had a great deal of concern about that. I said, this is unbelievable. Nobody's going to ever believe any of this.
Mm-hmm. And then was that the end of the sighting?
Then the beam stopped somewhere soon thereafter, but the 2 objects stayed in the south, and the 3 or 4 stayed in the sky to the north.
Okay.
And now when we crossed past the farmer's house and crossed over his road, we stumbled into a stream, and we were all soaking wet because we didn't see it in the dark.
Uh-oh.
I was back out there recently, by the way, about a month ago, and the stream's still there. And we were cold, wet, and keep in mind this is December. Temperature's probably 33, 34 degrees. The wind's blowing off the coast. It's miserable. We're cold. It's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We decided, hey, we've had enough of this. Nobody will believe anyhow. Let's get out of here and go home. Now, people have talked about, well, you saw the lighthouse. We could see the lighthouse. I saw the lighthouse. The lighthouse was visible most of the time, except when we dipped down a little bit crossing the field. The lighthouse couldn't have reflected off the farmer's windows. It was several miles out on the coast.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I was very familiar with the lighthouse, having been out to Orford Nest. There's a castle out there. There's some very good pubs out there with excellent food and drink.
Mm-hmm. Another one people say our emergency vehicles were in the forest that night.
There were no emergency vehicles in the forest that night.
Mm-hmm.
None of our vehicles had lights like that on them. The only thing that had a light on it at all, of any nature at all, would have been a police car. And where we were in the forest, you couldn't have taken a police car down there.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have, a truck or a Jeep or a four-wheel drive vehicle. Yeah, I know. Somebody claims now that they took a police car down there.
Yeah.
Well, for them to have taken a police car off base from Bentwaters, they would have driven 7 or 8 miles around and been out of contact, which would have been very unusual, and driven down, Jeep service trails into the forest. And, well, it's just not very plausible.
So you take your guys back, and you go back to the base, and then...
I went back to the base and sent them back to the dormitory, or, well, in case of Bobby Ball, back home, and Neville's back home.
Gotcha. What about that group that you had first come across, of the cops and everything that were... Had they left?
I think most of them had left before we came back.
Okay.
I think there was still a scattering of them, and they were leaving.
Okay.
Now, John Burroughs apparently hitchhiked a ride out there, because I know he was out there. He was not on duty because D Flight was on duty and John was on C Flight. But John was there because John borrowed, I think, Basenza. I remember Basenza's radio, and called me on the radio through the law enforcement net, which Bobby Ball was carrying, and asked if he could come forward. And I told him definitely not. Stay back here and keep everybody else back there. I didn't want any more people any further out in the forest or any more noise than was necessary.
Right. So, and I'm sure he was pretty excited because, and I know Pennison, when I interviewed him, he was too, because, of course, what they had experienced the night before was kind of being validated, whereas, people weren't taking him very serious.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. So then you kind of had this mess on your hands.
That's right.
So, and then you're probably
sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar with the old cartoons, Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby.
Uh-huh.
Where he touches the Tar Baby and you can't get it off.
Oh, yeah.
You're
now,
stuck to it.
Right. And so you've got to figure out how to let people know about this, how to tell your boss, and what to do with everything.
Well, the interesting thing was I had a lot of chatter on the command net because I was calling the command post continuously, too. You don't hear that on the tape.
Okay.
Asking them, call Eastern Radar, which is RAF Wattersham. We called it Eastern Radar. That was the Air Defense headquarters, the folks of the radar that provided air defense for our particular sector of Britain. And call them and see what they can see. Call Heathrow. Do they know of anything in the area? Check with our people in the tower.
And
so I was in constant contact, not all the time, but I probably called the command post 5 or 10 times. And I know that most of the senior officers, including both my boss and his boss, picked up on it all.
Okay.
So somebody sent one of the pilots up into the tower at Bentwaters with a command radio. I didn't know this until many years later. And he was up there monitoring. The only person that could have done that would have been the director of operations or the wing commander.
Right.
To kind of keep an eye and see what's going on.
So people are listening. Now, did they reply with any radar
the
hits
command
from
post
anywhere?
kept telling me nobody saw anything.
Okay.
Well, now I know why, because I know who was in the towers that night, and I know who was in the Wattersham, the RAF radar controller. He now says, oh, yes, I did pick up an unknown at that time, and it dropped off the scope into the area where we were.
Mm-hmm.
The guys in the Bentwaters tower, who now will talk but not on the record, say they actually saw something, and they also picked it up on the scope.
Wow.
But they agreed that they wouldn't talk about it because it was career-threatening, because
Right.
they both knew people in the past, air traffic controllers, that got decertified for seeing something.
Wow, decertified even.
There were 2 people in the tower at the weapons storage area. One was a communications man, which I have some notes from, and the operator that was up there, the alternate CSC, Central Security Control man, and they both say they saw something. And one of them says he distinctly saw something go down into the forest.
Mm-hmm. So then
I didn't know any of this back then.
It
I was
wasn't
very
until-
naive and very trusting.
I see. And it seems to be pretty common, at least, from the military people that I've spoken to, that that would happen. In fact, I had a friend who worked on radar on a Navy ship back on the Dew Line, long time ago, of course. And, they were catching things, and they were reporting them and getting a lot of heck. And they were asking, he finally asked his colleagues in other ships, aren't you guys seeing this stuff too? And they said, yeah, but we're not dumb enough to report it. We're not going to say anything. So it seems
I was
pretty
kind
common.
of stuck because
Yeah.
when I gave the tape to Gordon Williams, so that was the following Saturday, Sunday morning. I happened to go in the office for something and had the tape recorder. I was taking it in, and I met him in the corridor, and he kind of joked about it, and we laughed, and he said, well, let me hear the tape, and I played the tape for him. He said, I want to borrow the tape and take it down to the 3rd Air Force staff meeting. They had a meeting every Wednesday. That was the Air Force headquarters in England. And he took the tape down. I thought, oh, boy, I am in real trouble now. So I worried the whole morning. He came back after lunch, and I said, well, do I still have a job? And he laughed and threw me the tape recorder. He said, yep. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I played the tape for the whole staff. And he said, and General Baisley looked at me and said, is all credible? He said, yes. Do you believe it? I said, yes. He said, staff, what do we do? Nobody said anything. So he said to Williams, probably very wisely, it happened off the brace. It's a British affair. That was it, as far as I knew then. I think there's a whole lot more after that. But
Right.
And so Williams came back and gave me the tape back and said, what do I do? He said, I'll get with Tom Moreland. It's their problem. That's how the memo came about.
Gotcha. So you gave them the info, and it's theirs to deal with. But at this time, I mean, so there was no sense of urgency, even though these things had been around the weapons storage area.
No, that's the interesting part, because I kept thinking, but that wasn't my place to up-channel or something like that. That was way beyond me.
And at this time, it's come out since, which probably was another sticky area for you, is that those weapons storage areas did have nuclear.
I can't comment on any of that.
Oh, okay. I see. Cool. Understood. So, but there were some sort of other involvement. For instance, Peniston and Burroughs had been debriefed by someone other than you?
I asked them to do a statement, which they did, and it's now been appeared in Georgina Bruni's book and a few other places.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave me statements. Now, they also, I think, at that time, cleaned their statements up. By that, I mean they didn't put all the facts in there.
Mm-hmm. In their statements to you?
Yeah, they were all, I think, deathly afraid for what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I can't blame them. God.
Right. And when was it that you received those statements from them?
The following, I'm guessing, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Okay.
I brought them in one at a time and had them do the statements one at a time. I got a statement from J.D. Chandler, the Master Sergeant, who responded with the whole group of them the first night, and then went up to the gate, from Fred Buran, and they had already typed them up because somebody apparently had asked them. I later learned that there was a great deal of interrogation behind the scenes that went on, and possibly hypnosis and sodium pentothal.
And
I don't know that firsthand, but I've heard that from 2 or 3 different sources.
Okay. And is that possible? I mean, you being the deputy base commander, that some of your security personnel would be debriefed by other groups without you knowing?
Very common.
Really? And
Very common.
Who would do that sort of debriefing?
Well, in this case, it would probably be initiated by the OSI, but the OSI probably didn't do it directly.
Mm-hmm.
As I remember, the intelligence responsibility for various areas is divided up amongst the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. I think Marine Corps. I'm not sure about the Marine Corps. And as I remember, NIS, now it's called NCIS, and there's a fantastic program on TV about them,
Right.
had responsibility for England, and I would be willing to bet that the Naval Intelligence Service and probably their British counterparts were involved. I suspect that the local OSI handled it all off to them.
Gotcha.
Now, I did corner the OSI commander and his deputy. Not long after, and said, "Do you guys have an interest or anything else in it?" And I got a, "Oh, no, we don't really care about that sort of stuff."
Mm-hmm.
Not true. But again, I was very naive and trusting.
Yeah. So how much stock do you put into the possibility that this other interrogation went on?
I would bet 100% on it.
Wow. And why would they?
I would be willing to bet that one of the alleged participants has been used significantly for disinformation. One that talks about little green men and repair parts coming from our avionics shop, things that are so far out that, makes the whole thing look ridiculous.
Yeah. And I want to get to that in a sec, and I know, of course, exactly what you're talking about. But with Burroughs and Peniston, for instance, why would they use hypnosis and pentothal on them? To get more information out, or to possibly muddle their recollections?
I suspect maybe both, but primarily to get the whole story out, because I'm pretty firmly convinced that both of them didn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to say any more than they had to say.
Yeah. Which is a big reason why these things stay unknown, because, as we've talked about, nobody wants to hurt their career or their credibility.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you do believe it's possible that they also were trying to muddle their memory so that to help further hamper the correct information getting out?
I think to a lesser extent with Burroughs, Compensac, and Peniston, significantly with Larry Warren.
Okay.
Warren was identified as I don't want to use a derogatory term, but somebody that could be manipulated, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. Well, and
Larry and I have had this conversation numerous times.
Well, and he feels the same way. I know in conversations I've had with him, many others. We even had that in our article with him. He knows he underwent this debriefing or whatever, and that's a possibility. So with him,
I feel sorry for him, because I think he's been messed up pretty badly.
So did you hear about, after your night out in the forest, did you hear about any other events to some large scale at all that had happened after you taking your men out there?
Yeah, numerous other events.
Some
which I didn't find out right away.
Gotcha.
About, I'm just have to guess now, 2 or 3 months later, because I'd told most of the law enforcement officers and some of the security people that if they ever had another sighting, they'd call me immediately. But no, they had to obviously call me through their control center, in other words, law enforcement desk or Central Security Control. And Gordon Williams, interesting enough, and said, "Let me know if you hear something too." So one night somewhere, I'm guessing 10, 11 o'clock, a month or two later, I got a call. It said Wendell Palmer, who was a very reliable staff sergeant at the time, and another officer, police officer, are over at Woodbridge, and they've had an encounter with something. So I hopped in my car, and I called Gordon Williams and told him where, and told him I was heading over there. And at that time, I had a little TR-8 convertible, and I knew I could drive under the gates. We had those pipe gates, you've probably seen them, with red and white stripes on the road leading onto the flight line from Bentwaters.
Right.
And I knew my car would go underneath there with the top down. Williams had to drive all the way around. So I just got on the radio and started down toward the flight line. I called the command post and said, "Call the tower and clear me across the runway I'm going," which was highly irregular. I wouldn't ordinarily do that. And I went straight across the runway, out the back gate and over, and I got to where they were, Palmer and his partner, probably 5 or 10 minutes ahead of Williams. And by the time I got there and he showed up, whatever they'd seen was gone. They claimed they saw an object and it disappeared. So I have all that secondhand. I do know the following Guy Fawkes night, which is in November, 2 of our security policemen, law enforcement type at Woodbridge, saw something. One called the other, and they met at the base of the Woodbridge Tower, and they watched the large cigar-shaped object come in over Woodbridge Base, do a figure 8, and head back out to sea. They never told anybody till they were leaving the base, and they only told me. They didn't even call in because they had heard all the ridicule the rest of us went through.
Right.
And I heard numerous other tales from other police that had seen things too, as well as numerous British friends in the area.
Interesting. You know, actually, we got email, and I haven't forwarded this to you yet, and I'll do that tomorrow, if not tonight, from a gentleman who is a reader of the magazine who said he was a security officer in, I think, the late 70s, and he had a couple of events that had happened at Bentwaters. So I'll forward that to you, see what you think. And he's willing to share his name and talk to anybody who wants to talk to him. And we're going to print his accounts in our next magazine as well. So I'll send those over to you.
I've had 4 or 5 others come forward, too, but they don't want their name to be used.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't necessarily there at the same time. They may have been there a little earlier or later.
Right.
They claim to have seen different things.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, Larry Warren's account is pretty elaborate, of a bunch of officers coming and a lot of people in the forest, you know, and a kind of a close encounters event where a UFO lands and there's interaction with beings. And, I mean, had you had any hearing about any sort of, when did you first hear about this account?
I didn't hear about Larry Warren's account until almost 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Warren apparently went back to the States. He was discharged early, by the way. He had some issues, and he can explain them. I won't.
Mm-hmm.
He went back to the States, and he got connected somehow with Larry Fawcett. Larry Fawcett, you may know, wrote a book. I don't remember the name of it right offhand.
Yeah.
Up in Connecticut or somewhere in New England. And he had another partner. I don't remember his name right offhand either. But anyhow, they hooked up with Larry, and Larry did a TV show or something with him, hidden behind a screen with a disguised voice and a fake name and a few other things, and pumped them a lot of information. Somehow or other, word of my memo, the 3rd Air Force, got out to several people in the British UFO community, primarily Brenda Butler, Dot Street, Jenny Randalls, Harry Harris, and a Mike Sachs. Apparently, Dottie was within the States working on something and ran into Larry Fawcett and mentioned the memo. Well, Larry Fawcett put 2 and 2 together. Here's Larry Warren, here's this memo, we need this memo. So he came back to Bentwaters with a Freedom of Information request for all the data that was available. Well, there's nothing available. The only thing was that onion skin that I had.
Mm-hmm.
There's no official record. Nobody wanted an official record, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So the answer went back, no official record. I don't know who, but somebody said there's one at 3rd Air Force. So he went to 3rd Air Force with a, again, request for Freedom of Information Act. And I get a phone call from Pete Bent. Pete Bent was the acting 3rd Air Force commander and a good personal friend of mine. And he says, hey, Chuck, I've got this memo. I'm going to have to release it. I said, oh, please don't do that. He said, we have no choice. I said, burn it. He said, what? I said, you release that and your life and mine will never be the same. And he said, I have no choice. And they released it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know the rest of the story. About 2 or 3 days later, when it hit the States, ITV, BBC One, BBC Two, German TV, Japanese TV, the local radio station, the local newspaper, News of the World, which is the equivalent of National Enquirer, everybody was on my doorstep.
Right.
Meantime, earlier I had given a copy of the tape to Ted Conrad after the event. He asked me to make him a copy, so I laid the 2 tape recorders side by side and made him a copy. Well, he moved on and was replaced by Sam Morgan. Sam Morgan found the tape and said, what is it? He played it. I said, what is all this nonsense? So I explained it to him, and he laughed. You know, he and I didn't get along very well.
Uh-oh.
That's a long story.
Uh-huh.
I'd love to run into him again someday, but that's another issue.
Uh-oh.
So anyhow, he took my tape apparently and played it at cocktail parties and places as a joke.
Wow.
And word of that got out. Somehow or other, copies of that got made and got out too.
And that hit the media like a storm as well.
So here I am, hemmed in.
Mm-hmm. And so now you're in the middle of this. And, I mean, so what was your reaction to the media? Were you answering their questions, or did you try to hide at first?
Well, initially, I have to tell you a funny story. Now, I hope Gordon Williams is listening to this. So I got a phone call from Public Affairs, and they said the News of the World again, that's the equivalent of National Enquirer, is on the way to the base and they want information on you. So I went over to the Public Affairs office, and all the senior officers had a file over there with their picture and their biography, etc. I pulled my file out and just took it. Well, they show up at Public Affairs after I got back out of there and wanted my folder. Well, they couldn't find it, so they took Gordon Williams' picture and his biography. So they printed the front page, his picture in the front page and headlines in 2 or 3 inch block letters. UFO lands in Suffolk, that's a fact. And had his picture in there.
Oh, that's funny. Yep,
yeah,
I've
it
seen
kind of
that.
is now. But if I'd known they were going to get his picture too, I'd have pulled his file too. But I never thought they'd do that.
Right. So, and then there is a gigantic storm.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. So this thing gets really huge, and of course, Larry Warren's was the first account. So it must have been difficult then to kind of a lot of the questions you got must have been around, like, oh, who met with the aliens, and there were aliens out there. When of course that wasn't your account.
Fortunately or unfortunately, there were no aliens involved that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
That actually, physical beings that we could see or touch or
Right.
communicate.
And it's possible then you feel it might be possible that Larry Warren might have been given treatment similar to Peniston and Burroughs, except for that he was possibly implanted with some memories that were false.
Well, there were some very good people at what we call disinformation, and that's an art, I have to tell you.
Right.
We have a lot of specialists that's what their job is.
Mm-hmm. One, it would be a perfect way to, debunk or to
You
muddle
make it
this
so
whole
ridiculous that everybody laughs and says, well, here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, Larry says he was taken to this large underground complex. Keep in mind, Bentwaters is, 3, 4, 5 feet above sea level, probably the highest point right around sea level.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to go underground and do anything, you're going to have a pumping system and, seal something up pretty good.
Right.
We would have known about it. I mean, it would have been power required, maintenance required. Even the hardened command post is above ground there.
Mm-hmm.
There were no underground facilities at Bentwaters.
Right.
He said he went to the photo lab and went underground. Well, I've been in a photo lab building. It's an old tin building, the equivalent of a Butler building or, one of these garages they put up somewhere.
So a very loose, almost like temporary type building, just
Yes.
nothing very structural.
Galvalumen metal with, steel structure.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like an aircraft hangar, only it was finished a bit inside.
Now, John Burroughs in Las Vegas fairly recently, a year ago, last November, he, had said the same thing, that he did not hear about or know about any of these things that Larry Warren was talking about. But he did say that there was a group that had come, and he came to work, and this group was out in the forest. And he said, well, are we, are we doing security for these guys? When is my shift? What are we doing with these guys? And they were told, no, they have their own security. And he thought that was odd because typically the base security did security for any visiting groups, and these groups didn't bring their own security. He did have a recollection like that, but that's the only thing he remembers. Is that possible that there was a third party like that, or?
Certainly possible.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of activity at Bentwaters, C5, C-141s coming and going all the time. It wasn't unusual to have, how shall I say, things that were somewhat classified moving around and different activities.
Right.
It certainly sounds reasonable if somebody were going to bring a team in to do something in the forest that they would have brought their own security. Obviously, we didn't know about it, or it was done at a very, very low key. And, it's certainly possible, I guess, the best way to put it.
Gotcha. So, and then some other, as far as mysterious type of thing going on, you had mentioned that blotter where you had asked the security gentleman to write down at least something about the unidentified objects that Peniston had seen, and that had disappeared. When did you find that out?
Not until, really we all just wanted this to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And when it hit the press, I'd talked to Peniston and supported him and Burroughs, I think John had maybe left by the time it hit the paper, but Pennison was definitely there. And he and I kind of joked a little bit about it, as well as Bruce England, by the way. And as soon as it hit the thing, I said, do me a favor, because at that time Pennison was working in what we call the back office, administrative functions for the security police. I said, go pull both the law enforcement and security blotters. I want to reread them. So he went into the archives, and those two blotters, two separate distinct blotters, were missing. They were the only ones that were missing from that sequence. Now, did one of the participants, did one of the cops that was interested in what happened pull them? Did the OSI get them? I don't know. I would bet more like the latter, but I don't know.
Gotcha. But at least at this point, it seems like you said, you were naive at the time, but you had felt at the time that essentially most people wanted it to go away, push the problem onto the British government, and forget about it. And that was your impression, that nobody thought much of it back then. But now it seems you're under the impression, having talked to and heard about these other debriefings, that there was a very strong interest in this event behind the scenes.
Well, even some British friends who lived in the area told me later that they were questioned by, guys in black trench coats or whatever, one with an American accent, about what they saw and what they knew. Even one of the senior members of the Forest Service. Now, by the way, the Forest Service has a house out there in the forest. They actually lived out in that area. And one of his employees said, a day or two later, these guys showed up and asked all kinds of funny questions, and one of the blokes was an American.
Right.
I said, what'd they ask you? They wanted to know what was going on in the forest, what we knew, what we saw, and everything,
So definitely an ongoing interest. Now, one of the people who worked for the British government, Ministry of Defense, who is, out in the public about having an interest is Nick Pope. And how has your interaction been with him?
Oh, Nick and I have become friends through the years.
Yeah. Well,
I was I was very distrustful at first because, let's face it, what his position had been in the Ministry of Defense.
Right.
But the more I got to know him and the more I read, and he's written several books, you're probably well aware, and talked with him over the years and all, and I think he has a very strong interest too.
Yeah. Well, him and other researchers such as Leslie Kean with her book that's come out recently, it's great that people have been able to take everything, all the information, and decipher for themselves what is legitimate. It kind of just shows that if there was this counterintelligence type of operation, that they failed to some degree, because people have been able to see what are the credible events that happened.
But keep in mind, those agencies are so highly compartmentalized. They don't talk
to each
other. They ride out the storm. You watch and see what happens. You've been reading the paper in the last day or two, I'm sure, about all the documents that have come out now from the State Department.
Right.
You watch. A whole lot won't be said publicly, and the agencies will just ride it out.
Right. Well, it's kind of like the Washington Post when they did their whole expose recently on secrecy and all of the secrets, all of the things that they had exposed. And just like you said, the government agencies wrote it out and just give people time in this ADD world, and it won't be too long until they forget.
It becomes a lesser event.
Right.
Something happens in Iran or Iraq, or something happens here. There's a major fire, a big disaster, and okay, yeah, they did. Well, there was something I forgot. What was it now?
Right.
It's history.
So, and it's water, and they just wait it out. So, one of the things that I had noticed, or something that I think it was last March, was it, that a press release had come out where you had made a comment that you did believe the objects you had witnesses were most likely of an extraterrestrial origin.
That's correct.
Because and why is that? Why do you feel that way?
Because what I saw was definitely under intelligent control, and there's nothing we had or even today have that could do anything anywhere near that.
And for instance, some of the things
I've looked at everything imaginable, from mind control to.
Right.
Now, there's certainly a remote possibility. There's another dimension involved. I wouldn't rule that out.
Right.
But that's not my game. I leave that to Stanton Freeman and people like that.
Yep, who can look into that kind of thing. Well, and like you said, this is 1980. At the time, you had kind of alluded to that now you would call them lasers, the beam that had come down. But
That's correct.
Even that term, at least during this time, wasn't in the vernacular or a popular term.
No, it wasn't a popular term then. That's why I'm using that now.
Mm-hmm. Now, did those lasers have any sort of effect? Did they leave any traces on the ground or anything?
Pardon?
Did they leave any traces on the ground
No,
where the
there was
beams
no
had
marks,
hit?
nothing on the ground.
Okay. Just curious. Well, wow, it's an incredible event. And how did you feel then when you went to talk to Peniston, at least, or Burroughs later, where you had been skeptical before, but after the event, being more open to what they had experienced?
Well, I guess we had something in common.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best way to put it.
Yep.
No, they're very outspoken now too, and they're I guess very disappointed they didn't get support from anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But I really didn't expect it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, and now that Leslie Kean's book, which has your account and Peniston's account in it, how's that media response been? What do you think of that?
Well, I've gotten a lot of interesting phone calls. Are you interested in doing this, or how about give me data on that, or would you tell me more information?
Mm-hmm.
But it's been from people who have a strong interest in UFOs or the unknown, I guess. And I haven't heard a thing from anybody officially, and I don't expect to ever hear anything.
Right.
I'll tell you an interesting story. When I retired from the military, I was involved in some things that were beyond top secret. And I got a formal debriefing. 2 gentlemen from the Air Force did it. I don't remember their names now. I could probably dig out the paper. And we went over a lot of issues I couldn't talk about, which I understood very clearly. And I said, how about what happened at Bentwaters? And they said, Bentwaters? I said, well, there was a UFO incident there, and I was involved in it. And they kind of laughed and said, you can talk about it. Okay. So that kind of freed me up from that.
Mm-hmm.
Before I retired, I went to my big boss, who was a presidential appointee. I was director of the inspection, director of the DODIG, and I was approached by Unsolved Mysteries to do a program.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, So I went and talked to him, and I said, Derek, I've been approached to do a program on this. What do you think? He said, sit down and tell me about it. So, an hour and a half or 2 hours later, after walking through it all, he says, go ahead and do it. So, does that tell you something about compartmentalization?
Right. And that Unsolved Mysteries probably reached the most people. At least that's where I learned about it. I remember the whole event from that show.
They told me that was the highest rated show they've ever done.
Holy moly, wow. Well, it's an incredible event. And have you been approached and surprised by some of the people that have asked you about it, maybe some higher level people?
Not really.
No, just...
No, I haven't had a single high-ranking Air Force person ask me about it or Department of Defense person ask me about it.
Wow.
Other than a few that I have personal contact with as friends.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody officially has ever said anything.
Wow. Now, do you
the
feel...
closest it ever came was John Alexander came out to see me many years ago before I knew who he was.
Uh-huh.
And I knew he was from non-lethal weapons at Sandia. Well, you may know a lot of things about what they do at Sandia.
Right.
A lot of interesting, way out stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, here's my finally, someone's come to debrief me. Well, he had a strong personal interest. It took me a little while to figure that all out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're familiar with John now.
Oh, yeah, and actually he's going to be at the Congress as well.
Yeah, I know. I saw that on your schedule.
Yeah, so he'll be there.
In fact, he sent me an advanced copy of his book to work on the proof for him.
Oh, great. That's great.
Because he and I have had a relationship ever since. That was back in 1990 or somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about, with what's going on now, do you think that the public's opinion of this sort of thing has changed from when this event first hit the public to now.
Yes, but I think most people would rather put it in the back of their mind rather than keep it out front.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I had somebody, I can't remember who it was, tell me something interesting. You know, if a UFO lands tomorrow, you still have to go to work. You still have to go to school. You still have to pay your bills.
Yep. Yeah,
and that's just a hostile, you know, something dramatic with a lot of hostility or something.
Yeah. Yeah, Franklin Carter, the gentleman I mentioned earlier who was on the Navy ships, that's exactly what he says when he tells his stories. Remember, you know, they're not going to pay your bills. You're going to have to continue to go to work.
Your mortgage isn't going away, or your car payment or whatever. You have a credit card.
You're going to have to keep on paying your bills. But do you think it's important that the truth on this subject does get out?
Yes, I do, and I don't think there'll be panic.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there will be a great deal of concern. There will be some issues. I'm almost the opinion now that it isn't something hostile to be concerned about, although there may be some things we don't particularly like and don't approve of. But I think if we were going to have any real problems, we would have already had them. But I may be wrong.
Yeah. Well, you're probably aware of the press conference. You might have even been asked to be involved, but possibly couldn't be involved with Robert Hastings and Robert Salas, who put on the press conference.
No, I was actually there. I actually did give a presentation.
Oh, you did at that one?
Yes.
Because the nature of
I've been working with Robert Hastings. I've been working with Hastings for years.
Because the nature of his conference was kind of based around UFOs around nuclear installations.
That's correct.
So you were still able to get involved with that. And
I didn't talk about nuclear installations or nuclear weapons.
Okay.
I talked about my experience.
Gotcha. Well, what's interesting is that Hastings feels similar to you, at least he and Salas, that there's nothing necessarily that we have to be afraid of.
Well, I think there's a side of it we won't particularly like if we ever get all the details.
Mm-hmm. Would that be the human side?
I think that there's been some issues with humans, but I don't know. You know, I haven't had any personal experience.
Yep.
I can only relate what's been. Keep in mind, I don't sit on the computer all day doing research on these sort of things and follow every story. I respond when asked questions. If somebody sends me something, I'll generally look at it, discard it, or whatever, and get on with my life.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show and sharing all of this information. It's been very enlightening for me. Your openness is definitely appreciated, and I was very excited to have this opportunity with you today. Okay.
Look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Yeah, we'll see you in just a couple months out here in Phoenix or in the Phoenix area at the Congress.
Very good.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, as I said, Mr. Halt will be at the UFO Congress in February, so you can be there. Otherwise, we talked a lot about James Peniston and John Burroughs, who are also going to be there, and they're going to be a part of Linda Howe's presentation, and she's going to be going over this event. I know she has an interview with Halt that's part of her presentation. And then they're going to be there, Burroughs and Peniston, to do some Q&A with her. And then, of course, separate from that, after Leslie Keene speaks, we're going to have Colonel Halt talk, because he was also a contributor to her book. And then they're going to do a Q&A together. So we're actually going to have 3 of the members or witnesses from the Rendlesham Forest incident there at the conference, which is pretty exciting. And it's perfect because it's the 30th anniversary. In fact, just a few days from now, in a few weeks from now, is going to be the 30th anniversary of this whole crazy event. So check it out. Next week, we have T.L. Keller. He's the author of The Total Novice's Guide to UFOs, What You Need to Know. He's an aerospace engineer who's always had an interest in space exploration and extraterrestrials. He was a computer systems analyst. He worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. all kinds of stuff. This is going to be a lot of fun. His book is really great. We have a review coming out, and I think that came out in our magazine. So we gave it some good points. So T.L. Keller next week. We're out of time. Thank you for listening to the show tonight. Don't forget to check openminds.tv for more. Talk to you next week.